The moment the first tow truck hooked up to Brenda's pearl-white Lexus, I knew peace was finally within my grasp. Sounds a bit dramatic for a dispute over a parking lot, does not it? Well, when that parking lot is illegally built on the one piece of land you bought to honor your late wife, drama is just the beginning. If you are new here, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I have found that sharing these stories is a kind of therapy, and it seems to help a lot of you out there dealing with your own neighborhood tyrants. What would you do if your homeowners association decided your private property was the perfect spot for a new community project, without your permission and against every legal document in existence? Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. This all started because I bought a small house with a disproportionately large patch of land next to it, a half-acre of wild meadow that my wife, Clara, would have adored. She loved wildflowers, the chaotic, untamed beauty of them. After she passed, I sold our big family home and found this place. It was supposed to be my quiet corner of the world, a living memorial to her. But my HOA president, a woman named Brenda, saw my meadow and did not see a memorial. She saw an opportunity. She saw wasted space that could be bent to her will, and she decided to turn my sanctuary into an overflow parking lot. She thought I was just some sad old man she could roll over. She was wrong. She picked a fight with a retired civil engineer, and I used her own rulebook and a mountain of concrete to bury her. My name is Arthur Penhaligon, and for 40 years, my life was about precision. I was a civil engineer and a licensed land surveyor. I dealt in load-bearing capacities, tensile strengths, and the immutable truth of property lines legally recorded on a county plat. My world was one of concrete, steel, and legally binding documents. It was a world of order. When Clara died, that order shattered like cheap glass. The silence in our big, 4-bedroom house was a physical weight. Every room echoed with her absence. So, I sold it. I found a smaller house, a simple ranch-style place at the very edge of the pristine, rule-obsessed community known as Oakwood Preserve. The house itself was nothing special, but it came with something that was, a half-acre of undeveloped land right next to it. It was a meadow, really. A tangle of Queen Anne's lace, black-eyed Susans, and wild grasses that swayed in the wind. It was part of my property, clearly delineated on the deed and the official survey I reviewed before closing. To me, it was perfect. It was a little piece of the wild, untamed spirit Clara had. I planned to put a simple bench there, a place to sit and remember. It was to be my sanctuary. Oakwood Preserve, however, was not a place that embraced the untamed. It was a kingdom of manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and a book of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and RS, that ran to 112 pages. I read the whole thing. It was a masterpiece of petty tyranny, detailing everything from the acceptable shades of beige for exterior paint to the maximum permissible height of a garden gnome. I had no gnomes and I liked beige, so I figured I could fly under the radar. I just wanted peace. My first introduction to the ruler of this tiny kingdom came about a month after I moved in. I was on my knees in the meadow, gently clearing a small patch for the memorial bench, when a shadow fell over me. I looked up into the sun-bleached face of a woman who looked like her smile was installed upside down. She was wearing a visor with the HOA logo and a polo shirt tucked tightly into khaki shorts. Her arms were crossed, and her posture screamed authority, or at least a desperate need for it. "You must be the new owner of Lot 72, she said. It was not a question. Her voice had the grating quality of gravel being slowly dragged over asphalt. I stood up, wiping dirt from my hands onto my jeans. "Arthur Penhaligon. And you are?" "I'm Brenda, the president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association," she announced, as if she were declaring herself queen. "I noticed you're doing some landscaping out here on the common area." I felt a small, cold knot form in my stomach. "This is not common area," I said, keeping my voice even. "This is part of my property. Lot 72A, the adjacent meadow." Brenda let out a short, condescending laugh. "Oh, that's a common mistake new residents make. The developer left these little green spaces for community use. It says so in the bylaws." I knew for a fact that it did not. I had the survey, the title, and the deed. I had read the bylaws cover to cover. This was my land. "I think you might be mistaken," I said politely. "I have the survey documents." This half-acre is deeded to my property. Her face tightened, the fake smile vanishing completely. The HOA board maintains all common areas. This unkempt patch is an eyesore. We've been planning to improve it for some time. You can't just go digging it up. The word eyesore stung more than I expected. This unkempt patch was beautiful to me. It was a living, breathing thing, not a sterile carpet of HOA-approved fescue. I'm not digging it up, I explained. I'm simply clearing a small spot for a bench. A bench, she scoffed. Any exterior modifications, including furniture, must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. You'll need to submit an application. Form 12B. There is a 45-day review period. She looked me up and down, a dismissive flick of her eyes. Frankly, I do not think it would be approved. It would just encourage loitering. I felt my patience, a resource I usually had in abundance, begin to fray. Brenda, with all due respect, this is my private property. I don't need the HOA's permission to place a bench on it. We'll see about that, she snapped, her voice turning sharp as broken glass. She turned on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing in the middle of my meadow, the peaceful morning suddenly feeling tense and charged. It was the first shot fired in a war I never wanted to fight. The petty conflict had begun, and it was over the very ground I had chosen to honor my wife. I had a feeling Form 12B was the least of my problems. The first official letter arrived 3 days later. It was thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with the Oakwood Preserve logo. The tone was coldly formal. It was a notice of violation. According to Brenda and her board, I was in breach of Article 4, Section 3, unauthorized alteration of common area. It came with a fine of $100 and a demand that I cease and desist all landscaping activities immediately, and restore the area to its original condition. Restore it. It was a meadow. What did she want me to do? Unpull the few weeds I had cleared? The absurdity was breathtaking. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter in one hand and my property survey in the other. The survey was a crisp, black and white document, a map of facts. It showed Lot 72 and Lot 72A as a single, combined property under my name. The boundary lines were marked with the unforgiving precision of my trade. There was no ambiguity. The meadow was mine. I wrote a polite, concise response. I included a high-quality copy of the recorded survey, highlighting the relevant sections. I referenced the deed and title number from the county records. I explained, as one might to a slightly slow child, that since the land was legally mine, the HOA had no jurisdiction over it, and therefore, no violation had occurred. I mailed it via certified mail, just to be sure. I assumed that would be the end of it. Presenting facts to resolve a disagreement, that is how the world was supposed to work. But I was not dealing with a world based on facts. I was dealing with Brenda's world, which was based on her unshakable belief in her own authority. Her response was to double down. A week later, a second letter arrived. This one was for a new violation, improper maintenance of landscaping, under Article 6, Section 8, which apparently stipulated that all grassed areas must be maintained at a height not to exceed 4 inches. My meadow, with its tall wildflowers and swaying grasses, was a flagrant violation. The fine was $200 this time, with a threat of a $500 per week penalty if the nuisance was not abated within 7 days. She completely ignored the evidence I had provided. It was like arguing with a brick wall, if a brick wall could issue fines and write threatening letters. The harassment began to escalate beyond official correspondence. I would find anonymous notes tucked under my windshield wiper. "Mow your weeds," one screamed in jagged block letters. Another said, "Some people don't respect community values." I started noticing Brenda driving past my house slowly, multiple times a day, her head craned to stare at the meadow, her face a mask of sour disapproval. She was trying to intimidate me, to wear me down. She used the official HOA Facebook group as her personal propaganda machine. Without using my name, she posted long, rambling screeds about certain new residents who refused to integrate into the community and who thought the rules don't apply to them. She wrote about the importance of aesthetic uniformity and the danger of unkempt properties attracting vermin and lowering property values. The comments section filled up with her sycophants, a chorus of neighbors I had never even met, all agreeing about how terrible it was that someone was not mowing their lawn. They were talking about my memorial. I felt a slow, cold anger building inside me. This was not about grass height. This was about control. My meadow, in its natural, untamed state, was an affront to her vision of a perfectly controlled, sterile world. And my refusal to bow to her fictional authority was a challenge she could not tolerate. I was a nail that refused to be hammered down. The final straw, the moment my patient, methodical nature was pushed past its breaking point, came about a month into this ridiculous Cold War. I had gone ahead and purchased the bench. It was a simple, elegant design made of teak, sturdy and weatherproof. I had spent a weekend assembling it and placing it in the spot I had cleared, right under a small, lone oak tree at the edge of the meadow. It looked perfect. Sitting there in the late afternoon sun, I felt a flicker of the peace I had been searching for since Clara was gone. I could almost imagine her sitting next to me. The next morning, it was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty space, the 4 impressions in the soft earth where the bench's legs had been. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was not just a bench. It was a symbol. It was my connection to her. And someone had taken it. I knew who. I did not even have to guess. I walked, stone-faced, the 3 blocks to Brenda's house. It was, predictably, the most impeccably manicured house on the street, with flowers planted in unnervingly straight lines. Her pearl-white Lexus was in the driveway. I rang the doorbell, a hard, insistent press of my thumb. She opened the door, a smug, self-satisfied smirk on her face. "Arthur. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Where is my bench, Brenda?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet. "Your bench." She feigned ignorance, tapping a finger to her chin. "Oh, you mean that piece of abandoned furniture you illegally placed on HOA common property. Per the bylaws, any items left on common ground for more than 24 hours are considered abandoned. The association had it removed and disposed of." "Disposed of?" I repeated, the words tasting like acid. "You threw it away." "It was a liability issue," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "We can't have things like that cluttering up our beautiful community spaces." Her eyes glittered with a kind of triumphant cruelty. She had not just enforced a rule, she had won. She had inflicted a wound, and she was enjoying it. That was the moment. That was the turning point. The grief I had been nursing for months curdled into something else, something harder and sharper. It was pure, distilled rage. The peace-seeking man who just wanted a quiet life died right there on Brenda's perfectly swept welcome mat. In his place stood a civil engineer who saw a problem that needed a solution. Brenda had escalated this from a petty dispute into a personal attack. She had desecrated a memorial to my wife. She had declared war. And I was going to finish it. Not by arguing or reasoning, but by building a case, piece by piece, and creating a trap so perfect and so inescapable that she would dismantle her own little empire without ever seeing the blueprint. The fight was no longer about a meadow or a bench. It was about justice. I walked away from her house without another word. The time for talking was over. The time for methodical, devastating action had begun. I went home, pulled out a fresh notepad, and at the top of the first page, I wrote a simple title, Project Brenda. The first phase of any engineering project is research and data collection. Before you can build anything, you have to understand the terrain, the materials, and the structural weaknesses of what you are up against. My target was not a bridge or a building, it was Brenda and her flimsy HOA kingdom. I needed to understand its foundations before I could bring it down. I started with the law. I spent a full day at the county records office, pulling every document related to Oakwood Preserve, the original development plans, the articles of incorporation for the HOA, every revision of the CC and RS, and the minutes from every board meeting that were on public file. I sat in a dusty corner, surrounded by binders, and read. And read. And read. It was as thrilling as watching paint dry, but within the dense legalese and bureaucratic jargon, I started to find cracks. The first interesting discovery was about the common areas. The original plat map, filed by the developer 15 years ago, was crystal clear. It showed the parks, the green belt along the creek, and the land around the community pool, all clearly marked as HOA common area. My meadow, lot 72A, was just as clearly marked as a private, residential parcel, bundled with the sale of lot 72. Brenda was not just mistaken, she was lying. She had to know what the official documents said. This was not an error. It was a deliberate power grab. Next, I dove into the HOA's finances. The public records were limited, but they showed a pattern. Every major expense, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, fence repairs, seemed to be about 20% higher than the average market rate. And one company name kept appearing over and over: Prestige Property Solutions. A quick search of state business records revealed the owner of Prestige Property Solutions was a man named Gary Novak. Another search on social media found Gary Novak's profile. His sister's name was Brenda Novak. It was her maiden name. Gary was her brother-in-law. The picture was starting to become clear. This was not just about petty tyranny. It was about money. Brenda was using her position to funnel overpriced, no-bid contracts to her family. The HOA was her personal piggy bank. She was not just a bully, she was a common crook, wrapped in the respectable veneer of a polo shirt and a community newsletter. With this knowledge, her obsession with improving my Meadow made a sick kind of sense. It was the largest piece of underdeveloped land in the neighborhood. Turning it into something, anything, that required a contract would mean a fat payday for her brother-in-law and, I suspected, a nice kickback for her. A parking lot, for instance, would require grading, paving, striping, and landscaping. A very lucrative project indeed. My investigation moved from paper to the physical world. I needed to document everything. I bought a set of high-quality, motion-activated security cameras, the kind used for wildlife tracking. They were small, camouflaged, and had a battery life of several months. Under the cover of darkness, I installed 3 of them around the perimeter of my meadow, concealed in the branches of trees and tucked into dense bushes. They gave me a complete view of the entire half-acre. Any person or vehicle entering my property would be recorded in high-definition video, day or night. I also hired a professional surveying company, a competitor of my old firm, to perform a brand-new boundary survey of my property. I wanted an independent, third-party validation that was legally unassailable. I paid extra for them to stake out the property lines every 10 feet with bright pink flags and solid iron rebar driven deep into the ground. When they were done, the border between my land and the actual HOA common area looked like a neon runway. It was a physical, highly visible declaration of fact. There could be no more confusion. My ally in this endeavor came from an unexpected source. His name was Frank, a retired police detective who lived 2 streets over. He had a reputation for being a bit of a grump, but I had seen him argue with Brenda at a board meeting once, and I knew he was not one of her followers. I caught him while he was watering his prize-winning roses. "Frank," I started, "I need some advice." He looked me up and down, then gestured with his hose toward my property line, now dotted with pink flags. "Looks like you are getting ready for a fight." "The fight came to me," I said. I spent the next 20 minutes laying out the whole story: Brenda's claims, the letters, the stolen bench, and what I had found in the county records about her brother-in-law. Frank listened patiently, his expression grim. When I was finished, he shut off the water and sighed. "Son, I am not surprised. That woman's been running this place like her own private fiefdom for years. A lot of us are sick of it, but nobody wants to be her next target. She's vindictive." He pointed a thick finger at me. "You have got the right idea. Document everything. Every letter, every email, every snide comment. Keep a log. Dates, times, what was said. And those cameras? Smart move. Very smart." He gave me the name of a lawyer, a guy who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. "He is a bulldog," Frank said. "Cost you a bit, but he is worth it." My investigation had revealed Brenda's motivation, greed, and her primary weakness: her actions were built on a foundation of lies. She was a fraud. My surveillance was in place. My property lines were legally and visibly established. I had an ally and legal counsel on standby. All the pieces were in place. Now, I just had to wait for my opponent to make her next move. I knew it was coming. People like Brenda cannot stand being ignored or defied. Her ego would demand a response. And I was ready for it. I was no longer just defending my property. I was hunting. It was time to formulate the plan. Sitting at my desk, surrounded by maps, legal documents, and financial printouts, I felt a familiar calm settle over me. This was my element. It was an engineering problem, a complex system with a critical point of failure. Brenda was that point of failure. Her arrogance was the flaw in the design. My goal was not simply to win. It was not just to stop her from taking my land. That would be too easy. My goal was poetic justice. I wanted to use her own greed and overconfidence as the very tools of her undoing. I did not want to stop her from building her parking lot. I wanted to let her build it. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. I would allow the HOA, under Brenda's direction, to spend tens of thousands of dollars of its members' money to construct a permanent structure on my private property. I would let them grade the land, pour the asphalt, paint the lines, and install the landscaping. I would watch them do it, every step of the way, while documenting it all on video. Then, once the project was complete and they were celebrating their victory, I would lower the boom. I would reclaim my property, now with a brand new, expensive parking lot on it, which they had so generously paid for. And I would expose the fraud that motivated the entire project in the first place. I would not just defeat her, I would humiliate her, bankrupt her, and see her face criminal charges. It was a long game, a strategy that required immense patience. Luckily, patience was a virtue I had honed over a lifetime of waiting for concrete to cure. The first step was setting the legal framework. I had a consultation with the lawyer Frank recommended. He was exactly as advertised, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Miller who listened to my story without interruption, his face impassive. When I finished and laid out my plan to let them build the lot, a slow smile spread across his face. "Mr. Penhaligon," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "That is the most beautifully diabolical and legally sound plan I have heard in my 17 years of practicing law." He advised me on the specific legal steps to take. First, send one final, official cease and desist letter via registered mail. This was crucial. It would serve as undeniable proof that Brenda and the board were knowingly and willfully trespassing and breaking the law. It removed any possibility of them claiming ignorance later. We would state, in the clearest possible terms, that the land was private property and that any construction would result in legal action. "She'll ignore it," I said. "Of course she will," Miller replied, his eyes gleaming. "That's the point. We want her to ignore it. We want her to document her own criminal intent for us." The second step was to prepare a massive lawsuit, to be filed the moment the project was complete. It would name Brenda, every member of the HOA board, and her brother-in-law's company as defendants. The suit would demand not only the removal of the parking lot and restoration of my land but also significant financial damages for trespassing, destruction of property, and legal fees. Finally, Miller advised me to start a separate line of communication with the local authorities. Not the police, not yet, but the municipal planning and zoning department. He wanted me to quietly inquire if the HOA had pulled any permits for construction at that address. We both knew they had not, because you cannot pull a permit for land you do not own. This would add another layer of illegality to their project. With the legal trap designed, I moved on to the physical one. The pink survey flags were my first line of defense, a visible warning. I knew they would be ignored, so I added another layer. I installed a series of discreet, no trespassing, private property signs along the property line, facing outward. They were professionally made and complied with all state regulations. My cameras would record anyone removing or vandalizing them. I spent the next few weeks in a state of tense anticipation. I lived my life, tended my garden, and sat on my porch, but I was always watching, always waiting. I checked the camera footage every night. I saw dog walkers cutting across the corner of the meadow. I saw kids using it as a shortcut. And I saw Brenda, almost daily, standing at the edge of the property, staring at my signs and the pink flags with pure, unadulterated hatred in her eyes. She was stewing. She was planning. The trap was set, baited with her own ego. All I had to do was wait for her to step in it. The cease and desist letter, drafted by Miller and signed by me, was sent. 10 days later, it came back to my mailbox, unopened, with the word "refused" scrawled across the front in angry red marker. Miller was ecstatic when I told him. It was better than a signature. It was proof of willful defiance. The first sign that the trap was about to spring came on a Monday morning. A large flatbed truck rumbled down my quiet street and parked at the edge of my meadow. On its back was a small bulldozer. A man in a fluorescent vest got out, glanced at a piece of paper, and then started unchaining the machine. I watched from my living room window, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. It was beginning. The bulldozer operator was soon joined by a pickup truck from Prestige Property Solutions. A man who I recognized from social media as Gary Novak, Brenda's brother-in-law, got out. He and the operator walked the perimeter of my meadow. I watched on my camera feed as they approached one of my "No Trespassing" signs. Gary looked at it, sneered, then kicked it, knocking it flat. He then proceeded to pull up every single one of the surveyor's pink flags, tossing them into a pile like weeds. My cameras recorded it all in beautiful, 1080p resolution. It was Exhibit A, destruction of property and removal of legal survey markers. I knew what I had to do. I had to make one final, public show of good faith. I needed a witness. I walked outside, my phone in my pocket, recording audio. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the two men. I kept my tone calm and non-confrontational. Gary turned to me, his face set in a belligerent scowl. "Can I help you?" "Yes, you can," I replied. "You seem to be on my property. And you've just destroyed my survey markers. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your property? This is HOA land, buddy. We're putting in a new parking lot for the community. You should be thanking us." "I have a legally recorded survey that says this is my land," I said, holding my ground. "And I have a letter here," I pulled a copy from my back pocket, "from my attorney, advising you that you are trespassing. If you do not leave, I will be forced to call the police." It was Brenda who answered, striding across the street like a general arriving at a battlefield. "What seems to be the problem here, Arthur?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "The problem, Brenda, is that your contractor is on my land, preparing to build something without my permission. I've asked them to leave." She rolled her eyes so hard I was surprised they did not fall out. "We've been over this. The board has determined that this is an underutilized common area, and we are exercising our right to improve it for the good of the community. Your survey is irrelevant. Now if you'll excuse us, we have work to do. If you interfere, I'll be the one calling the police to have you removed for harassing our contractors." She gave Gary a sharp nod. He smirked at me, then turned and barked an order at the bulldozer operator. The machine roared to life. This was the first reveal, the moment of truth. I had presented them with the facts, the signs, the survey stakes, the verbal warning, the letter. I had given them every chance to stop. And they had walked right past it all. The bulldozer's blade lowered and bit into the soft earth of my meadow, tearing a brown scar through the green grass and wildflowers. It was a shocking, violent act. But as I watched that first scoop of my sacred ground being ripped away, I did not feel anger or sadness. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. The trap had been sprung. Brenda's reaction was exactly what I had anticipated. She was high on her own power, completely blinded by it. She saw my calm demeanor not as a sign of confidence, but as a sign of defeat. She thought I had given up. In her mind, the argument was over, and she had won. The sight of that bulldozer tearing into my land was her victory parade. She stood there, arms crossed, a triumphant smirk plastered across her face, watching the destruction with undisguised glee. She was so busy savoring her win that she could not see the cliff she was marching her entire operation towards. For the next 3 weeks, I was a silent observer of the systematic destruction and transformation of my property. It was a strange, almost surreal experience to watch from my window as a piece of land that held so much personal meaning was turned into a slab of asphalt. The crew from Prestige Property Solutions was not exactly a model of efficiency. They were loud, sloppy, and slow. They left trash scattered around the site, their music blared from dawn till dusk, and their language was foul enough to make a sailor blush. It was a daily assault on my senses, but I endured it with the patience of a sniper. Every day, my cameras recorded their progress, their shortcuts, and their complete disregard for safety or professional standards. I documented everything. I took hundreds of photographs, time-stamped and catalogued. I kept a detailed log of their work hours, the equipment used, and the materials delivered. I recorded every conversation I overheard, every shout, every curse. I was building a mountain of evidence, brick by painstaking brick. I even set up a time-lapse camera in my upstairs window to create a continuous, uninterrupted film of the entire construction process, from the first cut of the bulldozer to the last painted line. Brenda, meanwhile, was crowing about her success. The HOA's monthly newsletter featured a glowing article, written by her, about the new community amenity project. She described it as a much-needed solution to the neighborhood's parking problems, a project that would enhance community value and convenience. She painted herself as a visionary leader, overcoming minor obstacles and the selfish objections of a single resident, to achieve something for the greater good. I was the villain in her heroic narrative. I read the article and smiled. She was digging her own grave deeper with every self-congratulatory word she wrote. The community's reaction was mixed but mostly passive. A few of Brenda's loyal followers posted fawning comments on the HOA Facebook page, praising her for her decisiveness. Most residents, however, remained silent. They were the silent majority Frank had told me about, people who disliked Brenda's heavy-handed rule but were too afraid of becoming her next target to speak out. They saw the construction, they probably felt a bit uneasy about it, but it was easier to just keep their heads down. Their silence was a form of complicity, born of intimidation. I did not blame them. I knew that for them to feel safe enough to find their voices, the tyrant had to be well and truly dethroned. About halfway through the project, I received a certified letter from the HOA's lawyer. It was a slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. It was a frivolous, baseless lawsuit accusing me of harassment, intimidation of contractors, and attempting to interfere with a legitimate HOA project. It was a classic bully tactic, designed to bury me in legal fees and scare me into submission. They were suing me for trying to stop them from illegally building on my own land. The irony was so thick you could pave a road with it. I forwarded it to Miller, my lawyer. He laughed out loud when he read it. "This is fantastic," he boomed over the phone. "This is a gift. They've just officially documented their bad faith. We'll get this thrown out, and we'll countersue them for malicious prosecution. They are making our job so easy, Arthur." The parking lot was finally completed in early October. They had graded the entire half-acre, laid down a layer of gravel, and topped it with about 3 inches of cheap, uneven asphalt. They painted 20 parking stalls, complete with a handicapped space that was almost certainly not compliant with ADA regulations. As a final touch, they planted a few sad-looking shrubs around the perimeter. It was ugly, it was poorly constructed, and it was entirely on my property. It was perfect. Brenda scheduled a grand opening to coincide with the annual HOA community picnic. An email was sent to all residents, inviting them to come celebrate the new parking lot and enjoy free hot dogs. The event was set for a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks away. The trap was built, the bait was set, and the guest of honor had just sent out the invitations to her own execution. As Brenda celebrated her supposed victory, I was preparing for the final battle. The construction was done, the evidence was gathered, but I felt there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. I had proof of trespassing, property destruction, and contract fraud. But I wanted to connect the dots, to expose the rot at the core of Brenda's operation in a way that no one could deny. I needed an inside source. I needed a whistleblower. My target was the HOA treasurer, a man named Gerald. I had seen him at board meetings. He was a timid, mousy man who always seemed to be sweating, even in an air-conditioned room. He flinched whenever Brenda spoke to him, and he looked at the financial reports with the weary eyes of a man who knew he was complicit in something he did not have the courage to stop. Gerald was the weak link. I approached him one evening as he was taking out his recycling bin. I kept my approach gentle. "Gerald," I said softly. "My name is Arthur Penhaligon. We need to talk." He looked around nervously, as if Brenda might pop out from behind a bush. I can't," he stammered. "I'm not supposed to discuss HOA business outside of meetings." "This isn't about HOA business, Gerald," I said, my voice low and serious. "This is about criminal fraud. This is about wire fraud, embezzlement, and a conspiracy to defraud the members of this community. This is about you, and whether you want to be a witness for the prosecution or a co-defendant." The color drained from his face. I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. I had him. I explained what I knew: the no-bid contracts, the inflated invoices, the kickbacks to Brenda from her brother-in-law's company. I did not have concrete proof of the kickbacks yet, but from the look on Gerald's face, I knew I was right. "She made me do it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She said it was just standard practice. A finder's fee. She had me cut checks to a holding company. She said it was for consulting services. Gerald, you know what it was. And so will a grand jury," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "But you have a chance to do the right thing. Give me the records. The real ones. The invoices from Prestige Property Solutions, the bank statements, the records of payment to that holding company. Give them to me, and I will make sure the district attorney knows you cooperated." He wrestled with it for a long moment, his face a mask of fear and indecision. Finally, with a deep, shuddering sigh, he nodded. "Meet me tomorrow morning. 7 o'clock. The coffee shop by the highway. I'll bring everything." The next morning, a trembling Gerald handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside was the final, undeniable proof. It was all there: the massively inflated invoices from Gary Novak's company, the corresponding checks cut from the HOA's account, and, most damningly, the statements from a second, hidden bank account where Gerald had been directed to deposit funds. From that account, monthly payments were made to an LLC that I quickly traced back to Brenda's husband. It was a classic money laundering scheme, as sloppy as it was arrogant. She was not just skimming, she was emptying the reserve funds. Armed with this final, explosive piece of evidence, I went to see my lawyer, Miller. We then went together to meet with a detective at the county's Economic Crimes Unit. We did not go to the local police, as Frank had warned me that Brenda had a cousin on the force. We went straight to the county. The detective, a sharp woman with tired eyes, listened to our story and methodically reviewed the evidence I had compiled: the property survey, the videos of the construction and vandalism, the cease and desist letters, the frivolous lawsuit, and finally, the financial records from Gerald. When she got to the bank statements for the secret account, her eyebrows shot up. "Well," she said, a grim smile touching her lips. "This moves it from a civil matter to a felony. Multiple felonies, actually." The plan was set. The authorities were now involved and ready to act. They agreed to wait for my signal. The stage for the final showdown was the HOA's annual community picnic. The theme of the party was a celebration of the new parking lot. Brenda had unknowingly planned the perfect venue for her own public unmasking. While the law was preparing its own trap, Brenda decided to launch one last, vicious attack. Feeling cornered, or perhaps just emboldened by the completion of her project, she escalated things to a level I had not anticipated. She tried to ruin my life. It started with a new round of posts on the community Facebook page. This time, they were personal and vile. She accused me of being a reclusive and hostile individual, who was a potential danger to the community's children. She twisted my desire for privacy into something sinister. She hinted that a single man living alone who stares out his window all day was creepy. The implications were clear and disgusting. She was trying to paint me as a predator. The comments from her followers were horrifying. People who had never met me were suddenly experts on my character, calling for me to be investigated, to be watched. It was a digital witch hunt, orchestrated by a woman who would stop at nothing to destroy an opponent. Then, she took it a step further. She filed a false police report against me. She claimed I had threatened her, that I had been verbally abusive and had made her fear for her safety because her cousin was a desk sergeant at the local precinct. The report was taken seriously. 2 police officers showed up at my door one afternoon. Thankfully, I was prepared. My entire conversation with Brenda on the day the construction started had been recorded. I played the audio for the officers. It clearly showed me being calm and polite, while she was condescending and aggressive. I also showed them the footage from my security cameras, which showed her and her brother-in-law as the aggressors. The officers listened, their expressions growing more and more grim. They apologized for the intrusion and told me they would be filing a report on the false complaint. Brenda's attempt to use the law against me had backfired spectacularly, creating yet another piece of evidence of her malicious behavior. Her final, desperate move was an attempt to get me fired. Or, since I was retired, to ruin my professional reputation. She sent a letter to the State Engineering Licensing Board, accusing me of unethical conduct. She claimed I was using my professional knowledge to harass and intimidate the HOA board. It was a bizarre, rambling letter full of lies and half-truths. The board, of course, dismissed it as a frivolous complaint from a disgruntled neighbor, but the fact that she had tried to attack my life's work, the very core of my identity, was infuriating. Each of these attacks, however, only served to tighten the noose around her own neck. Every false accusation, every lie, every threat was another exhibit for our lawsuit, another nail in her legal coffin. She thought she was cornering me, but she was only sealing herself inside the trap I had so carefully constructed. The final showdown was just days away, and Brenda had armed me with even more ammunition than I could have hoped for. She was about to learn a very hard lesson about the difference between a loud bully and a quiet, methodical engineer. The day of the annual HOA community picnic dawned bright and clear. It was a perfect autumn afternoon. From my window, I watched the preparations. A large tent was set up in the common area park adjacent to my new, illegal parking lot. A bouncy castle was inflated for the kids. A man was setting up a large grill. It all looked so normal, so suburban. A picture of community harmony. But I knew it was the calm before the storm. Brenda was in her element, directing volunteers, pointing, and shouting orders. She was wearing a special, custom-made polo shirt that said, HOA President, above the logo. She was the queen surveying her kingdom on the day of her greatest triumph. As residents began to arrive, she stood at the entrance of the new parking lot, gesturing expansively. Plenty of parking, everyone. Thanks to the board's hard work, we have this beautiful new facility. No more parking on the street. People obediently turned their cars into the lot, filling up the freshly painted spaces. Brenda's Lexus, of course, took the prime spot right near the entrance. The board members, her loyal lieutenants, all parked in a neat row beside her. The lot was filling up nicely. It was a beautiful sight. I waited until the picnic was in full swing. The smell of grilling hot dogs was in the air, and the sound of children's laughter mixed with the low hum of neighborly chatter. Brenda was at the microphone under the tent, beginning her annual State of the HOA address. She was starting, of course, by boasting about the parking lot. That was my cue. I made a single phone call. "They're all here," I said. "It's time." 5 minutes later, the first tow truck appeared. It was a massive, heavy-duty flatbed. It drove slowly past the picnic and turned directly into the entrance of my parking lot, its yellow emergency lights flashing, casting a strobing, dramatic light across the startled faces of the picnickers. Brenda stopped her speech mid-sentence. "What is the meaning of this?" she squawked into the microphone. The tow truck driver, a large man with a no-nonsense demeanor, hopped out of his cab. He had a clipboard in his hand. He ignored Brenda completely and went straight to her pearl-white Lexus. He began expertly hooking it up to the tow lift. "You can't do that!" Brenda shrieked, dropping the microphone and storming towards the truck. "That is my car. This is HOA property." "Ma'am," the driver said, not even looking at her, "I've got a signed work order from the property owner to remove every vehicle from this private lot. You're trespassing." Just then, a second tow truck arrived. And a third. And a fourth. I had hired the largest towing company in the county. I had paid them a handsome fee to dispatch every available truck and to work quickly. Within minutes, the parking lot was a swarm of activity. Drivers were efficiently hooking up cars, their movements practiced and swift. The sounds of hydraulic lifts and winching cables filled the air, a symphony of consequences. The residents were in a state of stunned confusion. They stood there, hot dogs in hand, watching as their neighbors' cars were prepared for removal. The party had come to a dead stop. All eyes were on Brenda, who was having a complete and total meltdown. "Stop. I order you to stop," she screamed, her face turning a blotchy, furious red. "I am the president. I will have you arrested." That was my cue to make my entrance. I walked calmly from my house and stopped at the edge of the lot. I was holding a large, professionally printed copy of my property survey, mounted on foam board. "This is not HOA property, Brenda," I said, my voice carrying easily in the sudden silence. "It's mine. And you're all trespassing." I held up the survey map. I pointed to the clear, dark lines. As I have tried to tell you for months, this entire parcel of land, Lot 72A, belongs to me. You were notified in writing, multiple times. You chose to ignore the law. You chose to destroy my property and build this monstrosity. A low murmur went through the crowd. People were starting to understand. Their neighbors, the board members, were looking at Brenda, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. He's lying. Brenda shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. He's crazy. He forged those documents. Did I forge these as well? I asked, pulling out my phone. I had connected it to a large Bluetooth speaker I had placed on my porch earlier. I hit play. My crystal-clear audio recording of our confrontation on the first day of construction filled the air. My calm, reasonable voice, and her arrogant, dismissive one. The crowd listened, rapt. Then I played the video. I had it queued up on a tablet. I held it up, showing the footage of her brother-in-law kicking over my signs and pulling up the survey stakes. The crowd gasped. And as for the cost of this project, I continued, my voice cold and steady, perhaps the residents would be interested to know how their HOA fees were spent. I held up a new set of documents, the financial records Gerald had given me. These are the invoices from Prestige Property Solutions, owned by Brenda's brother-in-law. And these are the bank statements, showing thousands of your dollars being funneled into a secret account controlled by Brenda's husband. The meltdown was immediate and spectacular. Brenda started screaming, incoherent strings of denials and threats. Lies. All lies. He's trying to destroy our community. He's a criminal. Speaking of criminals, I said, looking past her. 2 unmarked cars had pulled up quietly at the curb. The detective from the Economic Crimes Unit got out of one, along with another plainclothes officer. They walked calmly toward Brenda. Brenda Novak, the detective asked, her voice calm but firm. You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Brenda's jaw dropped. She looked from the detective to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The public humiliation was complete. As the detective cuffed her hands behind her back, Brenda locked eyes with me. You will regret this, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. I will destroy you. It was her final, impotent threat. A hollow echo from a queen whose castle had just been reduced to rubble. They placed her in the back of the car. Her board members stood frozen, their faces pale, as they watched their leader being driven away. The tow trucks continued their work, methodically clearing my land of their cars, one by one. The party was well and truly over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Brenda arrested and the evidence of her corruption laid bare for the entire community to see, her house of cards collapsed in an instant. The remaining board members, facing a massive lawsuit from me and the fury of their neighbors, resigned en masse within 48 hours. The HOA was, for all intents and purposes, decapitated. The legal proceedings against Brenda were a slow grind, but the outcome was never in doubt. The mountain of evidence I had compiled was overwhelming. Gerald, the treasurer, testified against her in exchange for immunity, laying out the entire kickback scheme in painstaking detail. Her brother-in-law, Gary, quickly turned on her as well, pleading guilty to lesser charges to avoid a long prison sentence. In the end, Brenda was convicted on multiple felony counts. The judge, citing her flagrant abuse of trust and the malicious nature of her actions against me, showed no mercy. She was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA for every dollar she had stolen, and a separate civil judgment forced her and her husband to sell their home and liquidate their assets to pay the damages owed to me for the destruction of my property. Her financial and social ruin was absolute. In the wake of the scandal, the community began to heal. An emergency election was held, and a new HOA board was formed. Frank, the retired detective, was unanimously elected as the new president. The new board's first official act was to issue a formal, public apology to me. Their second was to hire a company, not owned by any of their relatives, to come and demolish the illegal parking lot. Watching the jackhammers tear up the asphalt that had covered my meadow was one of the most satisfying experiences of my life. It took a week, but soon, all that was left was torn up earth. The board paid to have the entire half-acre restored, bringing in truckloads of topsoil and seeding it with a blend of native wildflower and grass seeds. I finally got to place a new bench, an exact replica of the one Brenda had destroyed, under the small oak tree. The community, now free from the grip of her petty tyranny, started to change. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. People started talking to each other more. The ridiculous rules were slowly rolled back. The neighborhood began to feel like a community, not a prison camp. I found myself becoming a sort of quiet, local hero, the man who had slain the dragon. I did not want the attention, but I was glad that my fight had brought about positive change for everyone. Sometimes I sit on my bench in the late afternoon, looking out over the meadow as it slowly returns to its wild, chaotic beauty. The black-eyed Susans and Queen Anne's lace are starting to come back. Bees buzz in the air. It is peaceful. It is the sanctuary I always wanted, the memorial Clara deserved. I learned a valuable lesson through all of this. I learned that bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, are often just a facade, brittle and hollow on the inside. Their power is built on fear and intimidation, and when confronted with cold, hard facts and unwavering resolve, they crumble. Standing up to them is not easy, but allowing them to win is always worse. Justice, I have found, is not always loud and dramatic. Sometimes, it is as quiet and methodical as a surveyor's map, as patient as waiting for concrete to set, and as satisfying as watching a tow truck haul away a tyrant's car. That is my story of dealing with an HOA from hell. It took time, patience, and a little bit of my old engineering know-how, but in the end, justice was served, and I got my peace and quiet back, along with a beautifully restored meadow. It just goes to show you that when bullies push you too far, you can push back, and sometimes you can push them right into a prison cell. What do you think? Was my revenge too harsh, or did Brenda get exactly what she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I read every single one. For those of you who stuck around to the end, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of epic revenge and karmic justice, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and have those notifications turned on. It really helps the channel grow and ensures you will not miss the next story. Coming up next, I will be telling you about the time my entitled neighbor claimed half of my driveway was his and started parking his rusty old RV on it, so I built a legally permitted spite fence that trapped it there for a year. You are not going to want to miss that one. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.